is our very first Christian guest, Christian co-host on the show. This is Craig Reed, otherwise known as Craig Reed Holy on Twitter, and he is joining me today. And we're just going to see how this goes, man. I don't know. What do you think, Craig?
I think we're going to tear it up, Dan. I think we're going to set it on fire, and it's going to go well. And you and I do really well, so I don't anticipate any trouble.
Maybe I don't either, man.
But we'll be on the same team somehow.
That's right. I think so. I think so. But for those of you who don't know Craig, I would call him a friend. He's a friend of mine. Craig and I've gone back and forth a few times. He called into the show actually a few times. That's the first time I actually met Craig. And we talked a bit more from there. I also talked to him on his channel. But Craig's an interesting dude. Craig is a Christian who has a channel on YouTube where, from what I see, mostly interviews a lot of atheists, just kind of has conversations with them. And it's really chill, really laid back. He's also big on Twitter. He likes to follow others and get in talks with the atheist community on there. And he's just a chill guy, just a really chill guy. So my first question for Craig is like, Craig, how did you get into this position where you're at now? You know, you're kind of this Christian that hangs out with a bunch of atheists. I think that's pretty cool, but you know, that's really not that typical.
Well, it kind of developed organically. It didn't really occur to me to have a Twitter feed for a while. I was on Twitter and didn't really know how to use it. As embarrassing as that sounds, I was on Twitter for like 2 years and had no idea what to do. But way back when I was a Christian, like maybe 7 years ago, I used to go on YouTube and watch Jacqueline Glenn, The Amazing Atheist. There was this girl, Christina Rad, Thunderfoot. So I would watch these YouTube videos, YouTube atheists, mostly for entertainment. Like I thought Amazing Atheist was pretty witty. Ditto for Jacqueline Glenn. Christina Rad I really liked. Thought she was attractive, thought she was cool. And then I started, yes, she's definitely easy on the eyes. I got to say that.
All right. Let's slow down. Slow your roll, Craig.
We'll keep it calm. So I started a Twitter feed, and then in the Twitter feed, I started doing makeshift apologetics. You know how there's all these like conversations on Twitter. And I just sort of started a YouTube channel along with it, but I didn't really think much in terms of strategy or anything like that. And then one day I just got not necessarily tired of the back and forth on Twitter, but it had a lot to do with Shannon. Shannon had put out a video. I saw her first video that she put out. She was talking about—
That's Shannon Q that you're talking about, for those who aren't aware, who also has a YouTube channel out there. Yeah.
Yes, and she put out a video, and I watched it, and it was about, you know, improving the conversations. And I actually didn't know her then, but I totally agreed with it. And I put out a video saying, you know, I agree with this Shannon person. And then somewhere along the way, I started meeting, like I met Drew through, I think, Godless Cranium, invited him on my channel. But
that's my genetically modified skeptic, for those who don't know. Yes.
Yeah, my whole approach was different. I didn't want to have debates. I invite atheists on my channel to just talk to them, find out, you know, who they are, why they became an atheist. Just mainly with Drew, I just went into his background, and with you, same idea. And that's kind of how we met. I think it was when you were doing you weren't actually live. I think you were doing practice rounds.
Yes.
And he told me to call you up. Mm-hmm. So I called you up, and then we got along pretty well. And then you came on the show. And then that was the whole genesis of that. Like I would invite atheists on the show more or less to have conversations rather than to have, you know, let's debate. No, you're an atheist. You know, well, you're wrong. There's, you know, there was a lot of that going on Twitter, and I actually don't like it. I found it really unproductive.
Yeah, and you know, there are definitely channels out there who are like, oh, we don't want to debate, we just want to talk. And then they actually end up debating and like having arguments and stuff. But your channel was generally just like a real conversation. It was just really cool, and it just really, really chill. So I definitely recommend you watch that conversation if you're interested. But I want to go back just a little bit, because you use that label Christian, and not everybody uses the label Christian the same way. So I'm interested, I guess, in your story of how you came to use that label, because as I understand it, you weren't always a Christian. Like you didn't actually grow up a Christian. No,
not at all. I grew up, I mean, technically I was Roman Catholic, but it was nominally. We went to church on Christmas and Easter, and nobody expected me to actually believe the faith. They would have been really surprised if I came home and said, I'm really tracking with this Jesus thing. They would have been like, huh? Maybe we shouldn't let him go to church at Easter anymore.
Yeah.
I grew up in a really, really, really secular left-wing town. One of the most in the country, actually. I didn't know it at the time. Nobody knows that they grow up in a place that's unusual. But of the town I grew up in was Westchester. It's called Hastings. It was pretty much like growing up in Berkeley or Provincetown, or it's one of those type of places. And most of my friends most of them were Jewish growing up. And there was no such thing as an evangelical Christian. None, which is probably really, really weird for you, because there were probably half the people you grew up with were evangelical Christians.
Oh yeah.
I didn't know any. There were people who I interacted with who were Christian the way I was, like, this guy's a Protestant. They go to church on Easter and Christmas. But there was no such thing as a witnessing Christian in the entire school. There was a rumor that one girl became a Christian later on, this girl, Quinn. And it weirded everybody out, honestly. So fast forward, what am I telling you, actually? How I became a Christian?
Yeah, how you became a Christian. Why? Because you said you grew up pretty much secular, at least in a secular area.
Well,
so.
I would say entirely secular.
Okay.
That has a lot to do with why, when you and I talk, there's a lot of sacred cows of Christianity that I don't notice or even know about, because I wasn't raised in it. So I was raised almost completely secular. So, the Bible wasn't considered a holy book where I grew up. It was probably more an atheist interpretation. Matter of fact, one time my mom paid me $20 to protest on the side of pro-choice. They were trying to shut down an abortion clinic, and my mom gave me like $20 to come with her to defend, be pro-choice. And I started, interacting with the fundamentalists. And the stuff I said was straight out of the atheist playbook. I was like, the Bible got it wrong. Creationism is wrong. And I got into this long conversation. I wound up actually, even then, getting into a really productive conversation with this monk. Really liked the guy. And then fast forward, somewhere in my 20s, I became very, very interested in the idea of whether there was a God or not. But so I started seeking. But I didn't start with Christianity. I read like the Bhagavad Gita, the Tao Te Ching, got into a lot of New Age stuff, and then met my wife at the time, who was a Christian but didn't tell me, and I didn't know she was a Christian. And then she wanted to move out to California. And to make a long story short, she invited me to church one night. She went to this thing. I think his name is Benny Hinn. She went, and I encouraged her to go when we were in New York. She called him a spiritual healer. You went to see Benny
Hinn? Really?
Yes. And I had no idea who that was at the time. No idea. Never heard the name. Like I said, the only Christian I knew of growing up was Jim Bakker. That's the only Christians I had heard of were the ones who were household names because of scandals. So she mentioned this guy, and I had no idea who it was, but I encouraged her to go because she described him as a spiritual healer. And I was really into like New Age stuff at the time. So I said, yeah, that sounds positive. Go check it out. And then she comes back and she tells me she rededicated her life to the Lord. I had no idea what that meant. No idea. I'm like, oh, that's cool, sweetheart. That sounds good. And then we move out to California, and she's becoming more Christian as we move out here. And then there's a church here called the Malibu Vineyard, which is now defunct. And she tells me to come that one night. And I wanted to get out of work, so I agreed to go with her. And I mean, to make a long story short, there was this prophet there. I don't remember his name. And he kind of started saying all this stuff to me that was really intense. And it really struck a chord and hit home. And I started crying when he started prophesying over me. It wasn't really prophesying in the sense of like, you're going to meet this guy, Dan, and you're going to be on a radio show, and you're going to be a great man of God, and Dan is going to... It wasn't like that. It wasn't specific. It was, you've been in this war your whole life, and I forget exactly what he said, but it really struck a chord with me. And I started crying and became a Christian that night. And then from there, I've been a really, really, really like, I guess, a strong Christian, I guess you would say, which can be surprising to people because I'm really kind of laid back and easygoing. So partially because of how I was raised, I don't do the standard whatever it is that most Christians trip out on you about when you say you're an atheist, I don't do.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't raised to automatically go whatever I'm supposed to go. So I don't. You know, I'm actually a really pretty strong Christian though. I just not necessarily downplay it, but I'm a bit more mellow about it in actual approach, especially with people who are non-believers, because I recognize that it sounds, even some of the things I was starting to say probably sound outlandish, not to you because you were raised Christian, but to people in the audience who are atheists, probably already starting to sound a little bit out there, I would guess. Does that answer?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, I knew that you had told me once before that you had met a prophet and had told you the things. I had no idea you met Benny Hinn, dude. That's crazy.
No, I didn't meet him at the time. She went to his crusade.
Oh, she went, but you didn't go. You didn't go with her. Okay. No,
she came back and said, I rededicated my life to the Lord. And I was like,
gotcha. Okay, you weren't with that time. Okay, I was about to ask you some questions about Benny Hinn. I'll be real. That was really an interesting tangent. But yeah, I want to go back just a bit, and because you use this word Christian, and like I was saying before, you know, Christian does mean different things to different people. So when you say that you're a Christian now, what does that word kind of mean to you?
I mean, in terms of actual practicing faith, it means I believe in God and I believe that Jesus was who he said he was. But I practice my Christianity, as you noticed, a lot differently than most of the other people. It means I believe in God and I pray all the time and try to seek God's will for my life. But I wind up in a really different place than most of the other people who call themselves Christian.
I would say so. I would say so because,
well, you noticed that right off the bat, correct? When you and I, like when you first came on the show, you didn't know who I was necessarily when you came on my channel. And we just had a cool conversation about how you went from Christian to atheist.
Yeah.
As far as I could tell, there was you were not defensive at all. I didn't put you on the spot.
No, I don't think so. And I really like your channel for that. I wish there were definitely more Christian channels that do that sort of thing. But like now that you're on the other side of this, I guess, or you're kind of having these conversations with atheists, why do you think it is that you do see that with other kinds of Christians? Do you think it's an element of fear? Do you think it's an element of like defensiveness, or what do you think?
What a great question! Wow, God, that's such a great question. I could answer that for 5 hours. There's a lot of stuff going on. First of all, if you're raised Christian, there's an automatic defense. Like you grew up in a town where everybody's Christian. Let's take Drew as my go-to example. Oftentimes I use Drew. Drew grew up. Everyone he hung out with was Christian. He was like a church leader probably. Most of his family is Christian. So he becomes an atheist. That's an automatic, it puts everybody else on the defense without him trying to. You know, it's kind of like an open rebuke. He's not necessarily coming out and saying, I disagree with all of you and all your value system, but by definition, he kind of is. So there's a defensiveness there. I don't experience it at all because I wasn't raised with Christians. So I meet him, he goes, I'm an atheist, and I don't automatically go, I got to defend myself against you and say, because I wasn't raised Christian. So it doesn't even occur to me that I'm even supposed to care. If there wasn't this environment with this unnatural, every time you meet an atheist on Twitter, they're supposed to challenge you and you're supposed to fight back. And every time you meet an atheist on YouTube, you know what I mean? You know, the game out there.
No, for sure.
If that game exists, it wouldn't have even occurred to me to care that Drew is an atheist. I just ask him, I'd be curious. Okay, how'd that happen? Why? You know, and that's what I did on my channel. Other people are trained up, one by the church, to defend the faith, right? Which you've experienced firsthand. You were a Christian, right? Don't they teach? Don't they kind of tell you a lot? They propagandize you about what atheists are and what they're doing, and you got to go defend.
In the Baptist circles that I was a part, in the evangelical circles, yeah, for sure. I wouldn't say that for all of them, but yeah.
The other thing is, I mean, I'm not a very dogmatic person. I wasn't a dogmatic person before I was a Christian either. I was really easygoing, and I used to pride myself on being able to interact freely with, in my high school, I knew everybody, every crowd, and I could float in and out of different crowds. And I kind of prided myself on that my whole life. Nothing's changed along those lines. When I meet an atheist, I don't automatically think other, defend Christianity, you know, prove that God is real. It doesn't even occur to me to think that way. So why of that is, you know, it's interesting. It's worth exploring. But that's the first thing I would say.
That is worth exploring. That is so cool. It's interesting because, like I said, I'm not used to hearing that, at least from other Christians. I have my own explanations of why other Christians behave the way they do based on my past experiences, based on knowing other people and stuff. And it does kind of, it vindicates me in a way to hear like you as a still practicing believer say like, yes, I agree with you with all of these things. Like these things are going on in these people's heads because this is what I assume is happening. But as speaking as an atheist, I suddenly become, you know, an outsider, like a critic to that sort of thing. And to some people that might lose my legitimacy in a sense, because it's kind of like, oh, you're not part of this in-group. So you are criticizing it as someone on the outside.
Right, as the outsider.
Right.
Right. And sometimes they're right. I mean, it's different with you, Drew, Shannon, and Cirrus, and a bunch of other people who I met. Mm-hmm. You can have real conversations with them. That's not true of every other atheist. There are dogmatic atheists out there who won't let you have a conversation like this from my point of view either. You know what I mean? They'll do the same thing. Sure. Like I've been invited on YouTube channels where, like you said, the guy's like, oh, it's just a chill conversation. You're just gonna, and then all they did was try to challenge and discredit me every single time I opened my mouth.
Right.
And I don't do it because first of all, even if my goal is evangelical, let's assume that I do think that that's my job. I think it's a much smarter approach to just be as laid back and get along with people first, establish rapport, establish a common bond. Then they'll listen to you. First off, they may never accept that you walk with God or that God is real, but at least you're not putting them off.
You said
one, right?
Yeah, for sure. I want to ask you about something. You said it's your job to basically evangelize. Is that how you feel about like talking to me right now or talking to other atheists? Do you think that is your goal ultimately to convince other people of being Christians, or is it just wanting to see what other people are about?
Well, in this conversation, okay, it's way more complicated and nuanced than that.
Okay.
If let's say my overall goal is to evangelize, let's just say that I do kind of see that planting seeds for God or something. The best way to do it in this situation is just take a chill. Just have a conversation, not be as, you know, exploratory as possible and see where we wind up. Do you see what I'm saying? Like that would be almost a strategic choice. I mean, it's what I would do automatically anyways. You interact with other people, that should be your first goal, is to relate.
Sure.
Duh.
Yeah.
You know, when you're on a show with somebody, your first goal should be to relate to them. Duh. You know, to me, that's basic common sense. It's not common sense that everybody else follows, but it's basic common sense as far as I'm concerned. But no, overall, I would say evangelical in a general sense means, you know, build a channel that atheists feel comfortable listening to. People who don't agree with me can at least like or don't find me hostile or in their face.
Yeah.
You know, that's what I mean.
Okay. So
being an ambassador.
Yeah, for sure. I want to encourage everybody. This is a call-in show. Go ahead and call in. We have a few open lines so that you can talk to me or ask Craig some questions. This is a special opportunity. We don't often have theist co-hosts on, and this is one of those nights. I want to get to some calls in a second, but again, please keep them coming in. But I want to bring up something we brought up really quickly once in the past. I think you were calling me one time on this show, and you said something along the lines of like, yeah, most apologetics are bullshit. And I kind of want to explore that a little bit. It was something along those lines. That's not a direct quote, but I think you agreed with the sentiment that a lot of the apologetics, or at least Christian apologetics that you knew of, you either disagreed with or just thought were just total baloney to some degree. Do you still hold to that position, or?
Yes, on a lot of there's some that have grains of truth in them, and that's what I'm trying to do in my videos. It's not quite clear yet because I'm taking the long-term approach. But there are some things like Alvin Plantinga, I think his name is, with the he's got some interesting stuff where he talks about Christian belief is properly basic. It's not correct as he frames it, but it's heading towards something correct. There are a couple other arguments in there that are decent, but as they are framed, no, they are not successful. And what I tried to explain to you the first time I was on your channel, if they were successful, that would be it. You're not an unreasonable human being. Neither is, let's take Cirrus. You know, Shannon would still be Shannon, should be annoying. But let's take Cirrus. If you came up with an apologetic that actually proved God was real, the guy would not be an atheist anymore. He would fight it for a month or two, but he'd come back and go, you know, I can't see the logical flaw in this. Therefore, I don't know how God is real yet, but I accept on some level that the logic is sound. Therefore, God does exist somehow. That's what would happen. It would be game over because it's a zero-sum game. We can't both be right. You know, either God can't exist and not exist at the same time. So ultimately, one of us is wrong. That could be why these conversations get contentious.
Do you think that we've found that apologetic that you're talking about? Like, do you think that argument exists? No, you don't think so?
No, I don't think I think there are some that have potential, but as they're framed, no, they're not successful. And usually the atheist pointing out what's not successful is, you know, the first time when I started, I was new to apologetics when I started my channel. I didn't really know a lot about it. So I was really excited to William Lane Craig. I was like, cool. This is going to be game changing. And I was so disappointed in the actual, like when I first read the Kalam cosmological argument, I thought he was kidding. You know, I was like, is that it? Are you serious? And then there's the other one where they're like, you can't imagine the best of, I forget there's one that I couldn't even believe that the people were throwing out as an actual argument. The Kalam, you know, it doesn't work. The flaws in them are pretty obvious on first reading. You know, I don't want to be too controversial if Christians are watching.
No, keep it up. I love this stuff. This is the best. No, that's I like because you are saying this, right? There's something there that I can't have back anymore. Like it's like I said, I'm not in the position that you're at anymore. I'm not a believer anymore. So me saying I don't think the Kalam works, that's a different dynamic than you saying that the Kalam doesn't work. You know,
right? But the thing that the atheist points out, usually at the beginning of the Kalam, everything that exists has a cause. Okay, that's an assertion that needs to be proved. First off, you can't just say that. How do you know? That's, you know, there's all of them have flaws. And the other thing, even someone like Matt Dillahunty, ultimately, I don't think he's all that unreasonable. If you had a conversation with him where you're actually making reasoned arguments, I don't think he would really fight you too hard if you were dealing in the truth, if you were heading towards something that was true and you didn't deviate from truth. The problem with most other apologetics is they take a leap of faith somewhere. You know, let's assume for argument's sake that I know that God is real. Okay. And let's assume I learned that by faith. If I'm trying to demonstrate it to you using logic, I can't take a leap of faith anywhere in there, right? Right?
Yeah, I mean, depends on your definition of faith, because I do hear apologists that try to argue that faith is this other thing that we pretend like we don't use it for, even though most people use it for a different thing. Like faith is like a logically conclusive belief, basically, you know?
Right, but even there, even when there's a good argument buried in there, the Christian usually goes too far to try to make it case closed, game over, before it's actually case closed. The argument should develop organically, and it should be honest with every tier, and it should not have a flaw in it. And if somebody stops you who's smart and credible and goes, hey, there's a flaw, then you have to stop the argument.
Okay, really, we do have to get to the calls here, but I just got one more question that's burning on my mind here.
Go for it.
Because you're saying that you're not convinced that there are these arguments that exist, at least for Christianity, that are bunk, in your opinion, like that don't work. Is there an argument that you think does work that convinces you, or is your belief not based on any kind of argument in that sense?
No, that's why this will get too complicated to go into now. But yeah, no, my belief didn't come from nobody argued to me God existed. I went, aha, that makes sense.
Okay.
You know, I had a direct experience with the Holy Spirit, and it was real to me. That's why I became a Christian. That's a very different thing.
Okay.
Now there may be an argument buried in there, but it's buried in there. Take time. I'm going to call the other guy, the guys who do the Don't they do longer term things? The Heathen Hour or something? Is that
You're
what
talking
they're
about
called?
Talk Heathen. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Don't they want people to have long conversations and call back a few times? Am I getting that right?
I mean, sure, yeah, you could do that, but you got to pay attention to here. We're on Truth Wanted tonight, Craig. Hold on, don't be moseying over to any other ACA productions tonight. Okay,
So
plus
watch that, everybody. No,
they
okay,
do their things on Sundays, so